Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Fifth Child Podcast. This is the first official episode of the entire podcast. So, for everyone here, I say welcome. My name is Chris, and I'm going to be your podcaster for today. So, a little bit of introduction since this is the first ever episode of the podcast. Again, my name is Chris. I love anime, video games, movies, music, a whole bunch of stuff. And one of my biggest passions that I always wanted to do was actually talk about some of these things, whether it's in podcast form or video essay formats. So one of the one of my bigger passions was actually getting this sort of project out here for everyone else to listen to, or for myself to listen to, and actually create content that I would personally like to watch. So this podcast, you might say, is me stepping my first foot into that grounds. So I'm going to lay out some ground rules as to how and what this podcast is supposed to do. So every single Friday to Saturday, what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload this podcast. This podcast is going to consist of at least 2 different topics, at least 2. Like I said, I like anime, video games, and music and movies, so I want to be able to talk about those. So in terms of the content of every single podcast, there's going to be 2 different topics. There's going to be 2 different topics of talking points that I would like to talk about. So could be a video game that I just recently played, or that just recently came out, or that I just really wanted to talk about and gain exposure to. And then the same could be said for an anime, or it could be said for a movie. Basically, what I want to do is at the end of every single episode of this podcast, I want you, the viewer, to walk away with at least 2 different recommendations. So there could be, say, maybe, I could always mix that up, say there's 2 movies, or say there's 2 video games, or 2 anime, or an anime and a video game, an anime and a movie, whatever the case is. But regardless, the major baseline is that you're going to walk away with 2 different recommendations at the end of every single podcast episode. So there's the ground rules for the episode. So make sure if you want to maintain yourself as a listener here, make sure to pop in on my YouTube channel. I'm maybe gonna upload this to SoundCloud or iTunes. I'll see if I want to. I'm gonna see how much traction I can get off of YouTube first. So always pay attention for those episodes every Friday and Saturday. There's going to be at least 1 episode a week. I might make this a bi-weekly podcast. I'm shuffling around and debating about whether or not I want to do that and see if I have enough content to put out a bi-weekly podcast. There could be maybe also talk about news. For example, we just recently had E3. Now that is a big deal for video gamers alike, and I could go talk on ends about how much was revealed at E3, but I'm going to just stick with the 2 main topics of this video, which in this case, for this podcast episode, there's going to be a video game and anime, which is probably already spoiled in the thumbnail, but I'm still going to go ahead and talk about those, and primarily talk about those. So with that, there's the main introduction of what this podcast is going to be as a general baseline. What you're probably wondering also is, why is it called the Fifth Child Podcast, or why is the channel called the Fifth Child? Well, the funny story about that, if you pay attention to me, if you're like one of my friends and you pay attention to me on Nintendo or Sony PlayStation, or you have my Gmail account, or if you have my Gmail address in your contacts, my nickname on all of those, or my tag, is always Fifth Child. This is anime related. Back in my sophomore or freshman year of high school, I watched an anime known as Neon Genesis Evangelion, which is a really revolutionary mecha anime. And one of the characters introduced much later into the series was nicknamed the Fifth Child. He was one of my favorite characters in the series, and that name really stuck to me. So it's been my handle for literally every single social media account or gaming account. So there's those main introductions out of the way. So like I was saying before, there's going to be 2 different topics that we're going to talk about today. We're going to be talking about a video game I just recently played that I really enjoy, and then there's also going to be an anime. The anime is not something that I haven't seen. The anime is actually one that I've seen a while ago, and I just recently am rewatching the series now, and I feel like it's a good idea. I feel like it's good that we get some more exposure on it. So first and foremost, we're going to go ahead and jump right into the video game. So the video game we're going to be talking about today is going to be Dead Cells. Dead Cells is an action-adventure roguelike Metroidvania that was released on August 7th, 2018, and is currently available on PC, Mac, Linux, OS, whatever else you've got for your operating system for PC, as well as PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch. And I believe there is also an iOS version of the game that will be released sometime within the next year. Um, the game is The game is mostly available on almost every single this generation console, and is usually about $25 or so. There's currently a really good sale going on right now for the Switch. I'm going to be talking about the Switch version. I believe it's also on sale for the PS4 and Xbox One. I have a PS4. I don't have a One, so I'm pretty sure I saw the sale on the PS4 as well. But I'm primarily going to be talking about the Switch version. So, initial impressions with Dead Cells out of the way. I'm going to go ahead and say I really, really, really enjoy this game. I'm going to explain some of the reasons why I enjoy the game. Now, one of the things you might have noticed is that the way I described it is that it's an action-adventure roguelike Metroidvania. Let's go ahead and break down those two big phrases right there, roguelike and Metroidvania. I'm going to talk about Metroidvania first. So a Metroidvania is usually a two-dimensional platformer game that's an action-adventure. Some Metroidvanias are in 3D, but honestly, no three-dimensional games really captured the essence of what a Metroidvania is, besides Metroid Prime and Dark Souls, successfully at that. It's usually mainly just been a 2D experience. So for a 2D Metroidvania's main design concept is that it is a large interconnected map in 2 dimensions, and also you can get around using platforming, where you explore different areas of the game, and eventually you will reach some roadblocks in the overall map. That's going to encourage you to explore different parts of the map and find out what else is there. There could be an ability, there could be a weapon upgrade that allows you to go back to that previous area that you couldn't reach and actually get past that roadblock. Games that use this design in successful manners would be obviously games like the Metroid games, or games like the Castlevania games post Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Now, Symphony of the Night and other Castlevania games after that, besides, say, the Lords of Shadow series, which are God of War clones, honestly, is that there's also very, very, very heavy RPG elements into it. There's a natural skill progression as you go through it, besides the abilities that let you get past those roadblocks. You're able to fight different enemies. You're able to fight these enemies, gain experience points, and level yourself up. So Castlevania games... So that's where kind of the Metroidvania comes in. A Metroidvania more or less combines the aspects of the explorations in Metroid that allow you to reach those branching pathways and gain those new abilities to explore more aspects of the map, while also including in some light RPG elements. And Dead Cells is certainly that. The main concept of Dead Cells is that you are an undead slime that happens to inhabit the body of a random prisoner in this random dungeon, and you're just charged with exploring this massive area. And there is a strong sense of Metroidvania in that you are allowed to explore around the area, and you gain new abilities that allow you to go to the certain place that you couldn't go to before. In terms of the Metroidvania aspect of it, you're also able to level yourself up. You're able, throughout the level, there are these power-ups that allow you to upgrade one of your 3 stats, such as your survival, your brutality stat, your tactical stat. I know it's the stats are red, purple, green. Red is brutality, purple is survival, and I think green is tactics. I forgot exactly what the green one was. But you basically are able to upgrade those stats, and every single one of those stats upgrades a certain weapon that you have. For the Switch controls, you have the X button, you have your Y button, which is your main primary weapon, say your sword, your double-sworded, your double blades, or whatever, and then your X is your secondary weapon, which could be, say, a long-range weapon like a bow and arrow, or a shield. You also have Z and R, or you have ZR and ZL, which allows you to use, say, certain traps as well, which can also be leveled up as well. And now, the big thing about Dead Cells, though, is that it is a roguelike game. A roguelike game is based on the design principle, say, in like the late 80s or so, with games that are considered rogue games. In a rogue game, there are 2 main aspects of those games that make them roguelike. One, Procedurally generated maps. Every single time you enter a map, say one after the other, like say if you go to this one area of the game, let's say you enter this one area of the game, then you die, and then you come back to it. It's a completely different map. The map placement is different, the platforming's different, the enemies are different. So that is what the procedural generation of a roguelike. The other aspect of the roguelike is permadeath. You die, you start at the very beginning of the game, and that's where the procedural generation comes back into play, because you will die a lot and you will see the same areas of the game a lot. Very often, whenever I have not yet beaten Dead Cells, but my favorite way to play it is honestly picking up my Switch, and again, I do implore you to get Dead Cells for the Switch if you have it, because the portability really lends itself well to this sort of gameplay. And so the best thing about playing it on the Switch is that I'm able to pick it up, play it, and then play it for about, say, 15 to 20 minutes or however long it takes me to die, and then realize, okay, well, I reached that point, I can put down the game and then maybe play something else, do something else with my life, and then play it again. The great thing about the roguelike aspect of it is that even though you do die and you go back to the beginning, you're allowed to keep some of your skills. For example, you're able to get blueprints for better weapons. And most of the checkpoints between the areas in the game, you're allowed to spend experience points called cells. What a cell is basically the souls of the game, like Dark Souls. You're able to use those cells in order to upgrade certain stat points. For example, you can upgrade to a certain point to give yourself more health flasks, so you can heal yourself. More effectively during a run. Or two, you can make it so the random starter weapon or starter shield or starter bow you get is much, much better than what you got the first time you play it. So the more blueprints you get, the more blueprints you're able to get, the more cells you put into making these blueprints. Every single time you start out a run, you can start up with a better leg the next time through, and you can get better and better and better at the game. It's kind of like the Dark Souls thing. It's kind of like the Dark Souls style of gameplay. It's a game you're going to die a lot in, but it's one that you get more used to, you get better at it, your stats get better, and then you eventually end up getting really, really, really good at banging your head against the wall, that eventually you end up breaking that wall before you move on to the next one. So that's the general concept of it. Like I said, I didn't really talk too much about the story because there really isn't that much story. It's kind of tough to have a story in a roguelike game, because if it did try to have a story, it'd be all over the place. So there's really no overbranching narrative. It's just that you're an undead slime, you occupy a dead prisoner's body, you go through a dungeon, the body dies, you go back to the beginning, and the slime inhabits another body. It's as simple as that. So that's pretty much it for the concept and the story. So going on to, whenever I'm talking about a video game, I didn't really mention this, what I'm going to do is categorize it in terms of the concept and story. So basically, the first point, we're going to talk about the concept of the game. What's the gameplay like? What's the story like? 2, we're going to talk about the graphics and art. 3, we're going to talk about the sound and the music. 4, we're going to talk about how easy it is to play, like how well does it control. 5, we're going to talk about how fun it is. 6, we're going to talk about the replayability of it. So moving on to graphics and art, I'm not really going to say too much about the graphics and art, because there really isn't that much to say. It's got that nice little dingy atmosphere to it. It's a pixel art looking game, so it looks gorgeous. The art style does look really, really good at looking absolutely gross and disgusting, so it has that going for it, but I can't really say too much about the graphics and art because it's kind of minimalistic anyways. And the same could be said for our third category, the sound and the music. Sound effects are really, really strong. There's no denying that. It's definitely a well-produced game, even though as minimalistic as it is. The music is very, very good, though. It's got a little bit of an atmospheric tone to it with little Gregorian chants here and there, and I can't really tell what kind of string instruments played. It's some part of the guitar family, kind of like a mandolin. It sounds like a mandolin going throughout it, but there's very, very good atmospheric tones to it. Very often I find myself listening to other music while playing it, so I can't really speak to the quality of the actual soundtrack itself. And then moving on to the next part, the ease of playability. Again, like I said, it controls really well. The control stick is very responsive, or the control pad for the Switch. It's really easy to switch between which two weapons you're going to use. Again, your main weapon's mapped to your Y button, your X button is mapped to your secondary weapon, so it's really easy to have a nice combo with your Y button and then roll out of the way with the. And then also there's a dodge weapon. There's a dodge button, and that's your A button, so it allows you to roll out of the way, and then you can chain, say, into your long range weapon. So the playability of it is still it's really smooth, and I think it does a really good job. The game does a really good job at making sure that if you die, it's not the game's fault that you messed up. It was all on your hand. It was all on your head that you ended up messing up. So it definitely is not cheap with its deaths. That brings us into the enjoyability of it. Like I said, with it being a roguelike game and there being permadeath into it, permadeath really lodged into its brain, it's hard. It is a hard game. It is a very difficult game. It's not a game that you're going to beat in one sitting by any means. It's going to be a game where you're going to die a lot. You're going to be banging your head against a brick wall, and eventually you'll end up breaking that brick wall before you got to move on to the next one. But again, like I said, it's a very fun game. It's very responsive. Even though it is very difficult, the game does a really good job and making you feel like you are making some progression in it. Like, say, I could pick up the game right now and have a good 15-minute run of it and still feel like I made some progress in it, and then I could play something else or move on with my life. And that takes us to category number 6, the replayability of the game. Like I said, I have it for Switch. I play it on the go. And because of the roguelike nature of it, with every single dungeon being procedurally generated, there is a ton of replayability to this game. There's so much more you can do in the game. There's so much you can upgrade. There's so much loot that you can get. There's so much weapons blueprints you can get. Every single run that you make of the game every single time you play a run in the game and then you die, it does not feel like your time is wasted. It feels like every single run is distinctive no matter what. Even though you're going through the same area, there's still new weapons, there's new items, there's different placements of the enemies that make it feel like a different experience altogether. So I would say, overall, I would rate the game very highly in terms of replayability. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and break down those 6 categories. I'm going to give a solid 1 to 10 ranking on every single one of the different categories. So in terms of the concept and in terms of the overall design concept and, say, the story, I'm going to give that at least a 9 out of 10. I love roguelike. I like roguelike games, although most of them are a little bit too unfair. I think Dead Cells is the best balance of that. 2, I would, for graphics and art, I would probably give it at least an A. That's nothing particularly mind-blowing. And then, excuse me, for sound and music, I'd probably give it about a 7. It's not the prettiest sounding game. There are definitely other indie games out there that have got much better music. Although it does have a very decent musical soundtrack. How playable. The ease of playability, solid. 9 out of 10. Solid, maybe 8.5, because sometimes it does feel like your dodging is a little wonky, and it feels like it is kind of difficult in order to get your timing just right, despite the fact that I'll go ahead and show an image of it right now. Whenever an enemy is about to prep their attack, there's an exclamation mark that pops up above their head. That's usually your cue to dodge. The problem is, it's hard to tell what the range of their attack is, so it's hard to tell if you're dodging away from the enemy or if you're just dodging straight into their attack. So I think in terms of playability, I'm going to knock that down to like an 8.5 or so. And then in terms of how much fun it is, solid 9 out of 10. How replayable is it? Again, a solid 9 out of 10. So I would say probably, I'm going to just average all of that out. I'd say Dead Cells overall deserves an 8.75 out of 10. It is a very good roguelike game. It's a very good, it's a very solid Metroidvania, although I wish there was more exploration in it. As much as I do like roguelikes, I do like it when a game is specifically structured in such a way, kind of like most of the other Castlevania Metro games. And for example, sometimes I just really like it when the game is already structured really, really, really tightly. So sometimes the Metroidvania and the roguelike aspects of the game do kind of clash a little bit. So that's it for Dead Cells. Like I said, Dead Cells, it's on PC, PlayStation 4, Switch, the Xbox One. It's coming to iOS. It's only $25 right now. And I've completely forgot to mention the developer. The developer and publisher is Motion Twin. I didn't really check to see what else they've done. I think Dead Cells was their only game they did. The game went on early access back in 2017. I didn't play in 2017. I only just recently played it now for the Switch. But yeah, I totally recommend Dead Cells if you have a Switch. And again, it's on sale. I mean, it's only a $25 game, so if taking it on sale for like 20% off, that only bumps it down to like 20 or so. But even then, the full $25 is worth it. So with that, we're gonna go ahead and move on to the next topic, which is gonna be the anime of this episode. So I really had some trouble trying to figure out what anime I wanted to talk about for this episode because we have a really, really, really strong anime season this year for spring 2019. Technically, even though we're in the summertime, the spring 2019 series are still going on, and there's a ton of them. We have the Rising of Shield Hero, we have Demon Slayer, we have Fairy Tail, the final season, we have the new Bungo Stray Dogs. All of those series are stuff that I definitely wanted to talk about this season, but the one series that's been getting better and better and better, and it actually started all the way back in fall 2018, is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 5, Golden Wind. But I think it's a little bit too much to talk about Part 5 right from the get-go, and I would rather wait until Golden Wind is completely finished before I actually talk about that. So one of the things I decided to do for the last couple weeks is rewatch the entirety of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Parts 1 and 2, and I'm going to go ahead and just show you exactly what I'm talking about here, because I got my anime collection. We have here the only so far the only physical release copies of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure so far. We have Season 1, and then we have Season 2 and 3. So I went ahead and been collecting these anime series for a while now, and I am currently waiting for Season 4 to come out on DVD at the beginning of July, so I'll get to rewatch that as well. But I wanted to go ahead and actually just talk about Season 1 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. So JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is a shonen action anime. A shonen anime, for those of you who don't know, is primarily a manga series that is meant for, say, boys to teenagers to younger adult males in Japan. And the series JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, like I said, is produced by David Production, which is based on the original manga series by I'm gonna butcher his name. Give me a second here. I want to make sure I pronounce his name correctly. By Hirohiko Araki. And the original manga was developed back in, say, the late 80s. I know for a fact that the first season of JoJo's aired between October of 2012 and April of 2013. So it's relatively an older series. But the series, like I said, is a shonen action anime that's really, really over the top. Like I said before, Araki originally wrote this manga back in the late 80s, so it was riding high off of the hype of, say, Fist of the North Star and the original Dragon Ball. So it's definitely got such a distinctive 80s feel to it, even to this day. And you can definitely tell that by watching this first season. So, and also the current series, like I said now, if you want to stream the series, it is 100% available on Crunchyroll or the Verve app. So if you do not have Crunchyroll or Verve and you want to watch or stream anime, it's only for Verve, it's only $9.99 a month, and honestly, you get more stuff for it. You get like High Dive, another anime streaming service. I think you get Mondo. You get Shudder. So if you definitely want to watch some anime, definitely get definitely get a subscription to Verve. It's only $9.99 a month, so it's extremely worth it. And you can stream a whole swaths of different swaths. I don't think that word made sense. You can just watch a plethora of different anime, and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is one of those. If you wanted to support the series as well and get the physical releases, like I said before, you can get the original. You can get so far seasons 1, Season 2 and Season 3 on DVD and Blu-ray. These are currently the DVDs. Unfortunately, the Blu-rays aren't. I wouldn't say the Blu-rays are the best deal right now because the Blu-rays only contain the Blu-ray and an art book. They do not contain a DVD, so they're not a combo pack, and they are kind of expensive. For example, the DVDs range from about, say, 25 to 30 or so bucks for the DVD, while the Blu-ray packs are at least $60 for just like one of these. So like for example, this DVD would have been like $20 or so, or I think it was like 25 or so. The Blu-ray combo pack, not even the combo, it's not a combo pack, it's just the Blu-ray and an art book. The Blu-ray is at least $30 or $30 more, so it's about 50 to 60. So I don't really notice for me personally, I don't notice the quality change between DVD and Blu-ray for an anime quite that much, so buying the DVDs didn't bother me, and it's a way to support the official release. And they're available from a partnership between Warner Brothers, oddly enough, and Viz Media. Viz Media is another manga and anime publisher that does different other anime as well. In terms of the manga, they're the ones who are publishing all the Shonen Jump magazine anime or manga, and then they also dub, say, Naruto or Hunter x Hunter and a bunch of other stuff. So again, like I said, support the official release always and forever. So if you want to stream it, watch it on Crunchyroll. If you want to actually buy them, they're not that expensive. They're not that expensive on Amazon. So definitely pick those up if you want to collect as well. So, moving on to what the anime is actually about. What I'm going to go ahead and do is, like I said, break it down just like I said for Dead Cells. I'm going to break it down into only 5 categories this time. I'm going to break it down into what the story is, how the art and how the art and the animation holds up. 3, how does the sound and the music hold up? How are the characters? And then 5, how enjoyable is the series? So we're going to go and break it down into the story. Now, the tricky thing about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is that it is a very, very long, overarching story. The original manga is currently split up into 8 different parts. Every single part takes place in a certain point in time with a different main protagonist that all branches back to the very beginning of the series. I'm just going to focus on the contents of Season 1, which only contains the first 2 parts of the series. Part 1, Phantom Blood, and Part 2, Battle Tendency. So I'm going to go and talk about Phantom Blood first. So the story of Phantom Blood starts out in 19th century England, so about Victorian England, about in the 1880s to 1890s, when a young man named Dio Brando is adopted by the Joestar family after their father George Joestar is saved by Dio's father for saving his life in a carriage accident. The son of George Joestar, Jonathan Joestar, gets shunned by his family because of how much of an influence Dio has on his father, while in the background, Dio is trying to steal the Joestar family fortune for himself because his father, Dario Brando, was a drunkard and pretty much a terrible father, and also Dio is a terrible son too. Jonathan Joestar and Dio Brando get into scuffles throughout the first couple episodes of the series, and they start a really unhealthy rivalry, which leads Dio to end up biding his time. Eventually, they become adults. Eventually, they graduate college, and Dio and Jonathan finally come to a head when Dio gains an artifact known as the Stone Mask and basically becomes a vampire. And Jonathan teams up with random mugger he met on the street known as Robert E.O. Speedwagon. We're gonna talk about that name in a sec. We'll talk about that name. We'll talk about the names in a little bit. So together, Jonathan Joestar and Speedwagon end up fighting Dio throughout Victorian England, throughout Victorian London, while also teaming up with a random Italian dude known as Zeppeli, again with the name, so we'll get to that in a second, who teaches him the ability to use ripple energy, known as Hamon, which is basically kind of the Force from Star Wars, except you manipulate sound waves in the atmosphere and the environment. And so basically the entirety of Phantom Blood is just gentlemen fighting vampire-like gentlemen. So that's the story of Phantom Blood. And the story of Battle Tendency Part 2 takes place in the 1940s or so, or I think 1930s, in, again, England, and follows the story of Joseph Joestar, the grandson of Jonathan Joestar. And basically, without getting into too many spoilers for Battle Tendency, while trying not to spoil Phantom Blood as well, Joseph ends up getting caught in a conflict between Nazi Germany scientists and also the excavation of these ancient Aztec beings known as the Pillarmen, who were the ones who created the stone mask that turned people into vampires. Ultimately, Joseph ends up teaming up with not just Robert Speedwagon again, who's a much older gentleman. He also teams up with the grandson of Zeppeli from the first, from part 1, Caesar Zeppeli, and together Joseph and Caesar end up fighting the Pillarmen in these great action sequences that I can't wait to talk about and how they're enjoyable. But we have to talk about some of the characters first. So that's the basic story of part 1 and part 2. Part 1, Victorian London gentlemen using sound waves to fight each other. Part 2, some English gentlemen and Italian gentlemen fighting against Aztec godlike bodybuilders with sound waves. So that's the general story for part 1 and part 2. I'm going to talk about the art and animation for a little bit as well. I like to make this distinction between good art and good animation. So in anime, there is this discrepancy in the discussion about anime that kind of gets lost in itself. I want to talk about exactly what it means for there to be good animation and not good animation in anime. So in the anime community, there's this thing called sakuga. It's a point in an anime when the animation budget seems to increase slightly, or the timing to produce said anime gets a lot better. And what ends up happening is you can see a massive jump in anime quality. The images move a lot smoother, they're a lot crisper, and they're much more dynamic. And then there's good art, when, say, the art style is just really consistent, but, say, the animation doesn't move quite that well. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is an example of that. There's not a lot of good sakuga moments in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, unfortunately, which is unfortunate because, again, like I said, it is a massive shonen action anime. So it would be definitely nice. Sorry, I had to look at my phone for a second. It would have been nice to have seen if there was actually some good fight animation. Sorry, I just got a text really quick. I'm gonna go and send a text. Give me 1 second while I'm trying to talk. But it would have been really nice if there was good fight animation for the series. But again, it's really held up more so by the really consistent art style. Hold on 1 second. There we go. But like I was saying, with the art and animation, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure doesn't have as strong of animated fight sequences as, say, other series. But it is mainly held up by how consistent the art is. And like I said, just looking at these images, the colors splash everywhere. It has such great ideas of there's such strong semblance of great color theory throughout JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and the character designs just pop out instantly. So I can't really say too much negatives about the art animation. I just can say that, unfortunately, it would have been nice if the animation was much more smooth. And next, I'm going to talk about the sound and music. The music is amazing. I didn't look up and see who the actual composer was, but I can do that really quick actually. While I'm talking about that, while I'm checking out who the composer for the series was. The musical choices for the OPs, or the openings of the anime, and the endings are all really solid. You'll probably notice up until this point, a lot of these characters' names sound very familiar. Zeppeli, Led Zeppelin, Robert E.O. Speedwagon, REO Speedwagon, Dio, Dio, um, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is laden with pop culture references, and that's mainly because Hirohiko Araki is a huge fan of Western or American culture. So what he like, so what he likes to do is include as many musical pop culture references. Sometimes this is to the detriment of, say the streaming services, because what the streaming services end up having to do is retranslate some of these names to avoid copyright infringement. Because back in Japan, copyright laws for some of those things are just completely different than they are over here. But like I was saying before, it's very, very musical heavy, and because of that, one of the endings in the song, the first ending throughout all of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Season 1 is Roundabout by the prog rock band Yes from the 70s. It's always such a great way to close out every single episode, and like a lot of things in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, it has become a meme in and of itself. I can't find who the composer is for the Taku Iwasaki. There we go. So the composer is Taku Iwasaki. He's done some good soundtracks before for anime. He's done the soundtrack for Bungo Stray Dogs. He only did the soundtrack for JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 2. He did the soundtrack for Noragami, which is again a good series, for Soul Eater, for Gurren Lagann. Oh wow. Really? He did the music for the series? Maybe there's another. I'm jumping down this rabbit hole for a second here. I swore there should at least be another composer, because I should have recognized that. Oh, okay. I guess he did the soundtrack. I'm gonna leave that rabbit hole on its own. So, like I said, the opening themes, the first opening, gosh, I can't even pronounce the opening for, there we go. So the first opening the first opening, which is used for the entirety of Phantom Blood, is Sonochi no Sadame, which, that's, if you've heard that song, that's the one where it screams Joe, Joe, like in the middle of this, like at the very end of the song. I like that song. It's not as good as opening theme number 2 for Part 2, which is Bloody Stream by Coda. Now, that is a great opening. It's one of the best JoJo themes in the entire series. So that's it for the sound and the music. Talking about the characters, I'm going to talk about the Phantom Blood characters first. Unfortunately, I don't have much of my issues with Phantom Blood is that I do not like the characters in Phantom Blood nearly as much as I do anywhere else. Jonathan Joestar is the main protagonist of Phantom Blood, and he's definitely a good man. He's a very, very prideful character, and he always is striving to be a gentleman, but that kind of makes him into a bland character. He's not very dynamic. He has one character arc, and that is just to become a gentleman. So it doesn't make him the most dynamic character, unfortunately. The Phantom Blood is mainly carried by how much of a villainous bastard that Dio is. Araki makes some choices with Dio that really, really make you want to hate him significantly. That's all I'm gonna say about Dio. And then other characters say, Speedwagon. Speedwagon is basically just that. Speedwagon is just basically the hype man for Jonathan Joestar in all of Part 1. His entire character in Part 1 is him just really, really being like the big cheerleader for Jonathan Joestar. And again, that's kind of become a meme at this point. I'm just look up a Robert, after you watch the series, just look up on Google Images and look up Robert E.O. Speedwagon, and you will find a ton of memes involving him. So that's all I can really, really say about Part 1's characters without going too much into spoilers. Now, Part 2 is certainly when the characters get a huge, huge bump up. In terms of the main two characters, you have Joseph Joestar and Caesar Zeppeli. Joseph is such a better character than Jonathan Joestar. I'm gonna go ahead and spoil this right now. I don't think there has been a main character in JoJo's who is as good as Joseph Joestar. Um, Joseph has such a more rebellious attitude. He's got such an arrogant he's got such a more arrogant attitude to him. He's so much more different than Jonathan. Jonathan's a gentleman through and through. He's a bore. Joseph actually is dynamic and is really, really enjoyable to watch. And while Jonathan definitely goes out of his way, and while Jonathan definitely used more brute force in the way he used Hamon, and in the fight sequences, every single fight sequence with Joseph is so much more strategic because Joseph is smarter than everyone else makes him out to be. Yeah, he's a big, muscly looking brute, but he's so much more intelligent. He uses his wits more than his actual strength in his fights, and he just also has his secret technique is being able to run away when he should run away. Other great characters to talk about in part two would be Caesar Zeppeli himself, who's basically the secondary main protagonist. He's a huge ladies' man. He's just as arrogant as Joseph Joestar, and that kind of leads to a lot of butting of heads between Joseph and Caesar. But he again is also a really, really good character, and he's a great complement to Joseph. Probably the only characters I don't like as much would be the Pillarmen. They're definitely weaker characters. The Pillarmen are three. The Pillarmen are three characters. Again, like I said, they're the main antagonist of Battle Tendency, and they're the last remaining members of an ancient race, all the way back from like Aztec times or whatever. They're extremely strong. They're like they're like the most intelligent beings in the world at this point. They can live forever. They're basically gods. And the three Pillarmen that we are introduced to are Cars, AC/DC, and Wamu. Yeah. Cars the band, AC/DC the band, and Wham. Yeah, trust me. Like I said, lots of musical references in the series. You're either gonna love it or you're gonna hate it. But they're not the most villainous of characters. I mean, like I said, Araki makes some choices with Dio that really, 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 really make you want to hate him. But the Pillarmen aren't really villains I can hate. They're also not characters I can really like all that much. So I unfortunately do not have the, I can't really say too much positives about the Pillarmen. I guess one of the good things that actually makes you like them, is that a couple of the Pillarmen, like say AC/DC and Wamu, are extremely honorable in their fights. They definitely acknowledge Joseph and Caesar's capacity whenever they're fighting. So that's probably the good thing I could say. They're honorable fighters. So that's it for the characters. Again, we're gonna go back into the enjoyment. We're going back into we're going into the last category, which is enjoyments. Do you like shonen action anime? Do you like extremely well-paced fight sequences with great techniques being used and awesome wits? JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is definitely for you. Do you like big muscly men? Do you like big muscular gentlemen fighting against each other? You're gonna love JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Do you like a series that doesn't take itself seriously almost all the time, but knows when the right time to take itself seriously is? Then JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is definitely for you. For me, the entirety of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is a total delight, and as far as the overall scope of Season 1 is concerned, Phantom Blood does drag the series a little bit along. It's the first 9 episodes of the series. I think it's the first 9 episodes. Let me take a look really quick. Phantom Blood is the first 9... Yep. Phantom Blood is the first 9 episodes of the series, and those 9 episodes do take a while to get going. I'm not gonna lie, the first time I saw JoJo's about, say, 5 or so years ago, I kind of gave up after Phantom Blood, even though, despite the fact that it was only 9 episodes. But then I decided to power my way through it. Phantom Blood got better. It got more interesting when Hamon got introduced. The fights became more complex. And then I got into Battle Tendency. And Battle Tendency is basically the last it's the last 16 episodes. It's more than half of all of Season 1. And when more than half of Season 1 is still probably to this day one of the best parts in JoJo's, that is more than enough for me to recommend it. slog through Phantom Blood if you need to, unless you like Phantom Blood. I have a friend who really liked Jonathan Joestar, and he still really likes Phantom Blood a lot. But again, if Phantom Blood's for you, good. If you don't like it, I implore you to slog through it to get to Battle Tendency, because Battle Tendency shows you a better idea of exactly what JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is all about. All about how interesting the fights can get, how complex the fights can be. While the fight animation is not as good as, say, other series, they definitely are much more interesting than other series as well. It's not your typical shonen action series. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and close out on JoJo's. So like I said, JoJo's is available on Crunchyroll. It's available on Verve. Like I said, you want to buy the DVDs or Blu-rays, they're totally on Amazon. They go for like $20 to $30 a pop for the DVD copies. If you want to get the Blu-ray copies, sure you could, but I would only get the Blu-ray copies like if you really feel like you want to. I'm a big fan of JoJo's, but I can't justify getting the Blu-ray copies for such a small reward, with no Blu-ray DVD combo pack and just an art book and such a huge markup price. I can't see it as worth it. So with that, I think that's pretty much the end of the podcast. So like I said, I hope you were able to stick through the entire podcast. I hope you certainly enjoyed it. I know I enjoyed. Again, I like talking about things that I like. So if this is more or less what you are looking for in an anime video game podcast, please feel free to follow me. Please feel free to subscribe on YouTube. Please definitely like this video. Please leave a comment if you have any sort of constructive advice. If there's any topics that you'd like me to talk about, say in the podcast, please leave a comment. I'm totally receptive to any sort of criticism that you might have of me. And hopefully that this gives you a good baseline of exactly what this podcast is going to be. Like I said, at least 2 things. If it's a busier week, I could at least be able to talk at length about one thing. So with that, I hope you enjoy the podcast. And like I said, this podcast episode I hopefully have uploaded by Friday and Saturday. And so once I get into a more consistent schedule, I'm going to try to get it up sometime between Friday afternoon to Saturday morning. Hopefully I will get consistent enough to be able to tell you exactly what time it does drop. And if you're wanting to support me even further, like I said, beyond just like, commenting, and subscribe, what you can then do as well is that you can also go onto in the link. You can go to the link in the description below. I also have a Patreon as well. Now with Patreon, if for those of you who don't know, Patreon is a service where you basically donate a certain amount every single month to your favorite content creators. You can donate anywhere up to, personally my Patreon alone, I have only one tier. It's $1 plus onwards. So you can donate anywhere from $1 to however much that you want per month. And basically it's a way to support us. Honestly, just to do this podcast alone, I don't really even necessarily need the Patreon to do that. But the idea of the Patreon is that, 1, it helps gain some more exposure for the channel itself, and 2, it does allow me a chance to also develop the channel into something else. Obviously, if I'm doing one podcast a week every single week, and I'm doing at least 2 different things in one video game and one anime, I'm gonna run out of topics eventually, unfortunately. So I need a way to help make sure that this channel grows even further than what it is right now. And honestly, a Patreon would help me as well. I've got a lot of ideas for what I want to do. Links in the description down below if you want to read, but I would like to eventually maybe do video essays. I maybe like to start a Let's Play channel eventually. I don't know. I'm not too sure about the Let's Play thing. I'm too lazy to buy myself a capture card. But for the time being, I definitely want to be able to use my writing. Again, like I said, the podcast for me personally and for you guys is an idea for you to see exactly what goes on in my head whenever I talk about something that I like. And if you want those thoughts, obviously, much more structured and actually in written form, so I'm able to speak my own mind without having to jabber on and get distracted, the video essays would be that format for you guys to actually listen to me, for me to actually have a much more structured and more, not, I wouldn't say informed, but more coherent way for me to get my point across. So like I said, links in the description down below for the Patreon. If there's any amount, if you like what you see here and you've liked and commented and you've subscribed and you want to do even more, seriously, any amount helps a month. And if you can think of anyone else who might like this besides you, certainly share this with your friends. I don't care who listens to me. If you like anime and you like video games and you can listen to my nasally voice for an hour, sure, go on ahead. Share it with whoever else that you can think of who would enjoy it. So with that, I think that's it for the podcast. Again, thank you so much for listening, and please be sure to stay tuned for next week. Still trying to figure out what anime series I want to talk about next. I have an idea for what video game I'm going to want to talk about as well. Hopefully, in terms of the video game, and hopefully in terms of video games, I'm going to steer a little bit. I'm going to steer away from the big AAA titles as much. I want to put more exposure onto independent. I want to give some exposure to independent games because, like I said, they're independent games and they don't have as much exposure as they should. And so I'm going to steer away from the big AAA games that just maybe released in the last year. I could maybe do past games that are really, really good that have kind of been lost to the sea of time. But in terms of these recently released games, I'm mainly going to focus on these independent titles a little bit. So expect to hear that as well. So if you're looking for a great independent game, like I said before, you got Dead Cells. So hopefully next week I can get you guys another great title to recommend as well. So with that, that's going to be me. Again, I'm Chris. And again, thank you for chilling. Thank you for chilling out and paying attention to this podcast. Again, this is the Fifth Child Podcast. Make sure to share it with your friends if you like. Especially if you like it, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to follow me on Patreon, please, anything helps. All right, and thank you so much. And I will be seeing you guys next Friday. Guess who doesn't know how to end a podcast?